So as uh, as you see on the first slide, this is our 36th annual Alice G. Smith Lecture, and I welcome you and look forward to our presentation tonight. For those who do not know me, my name is Denise Sheriff, and I am the LIS Program Director here at the USF School of Information. And I first would like to give you a little bit of information about the lecture. The Alice G. Smith Lecture was established in 1989 as an annual recognition of a scholar or author whose achievements have been instrumental in the development of librarianship or information studies. It's the longest continuously running lectureship in LIS. The lecture series honors the memory of the school's first director, Alice Gullen Smith, who was central to the school's first accreditation by the American Library Association in 1975. It's my honor and privilege to introduce you to the 36th Alice G. Smith lecturer, Tamara Taylor. Tamara is the university librarian and the USF Library's Director of Special Collections. Tamara has a master's degrees in Library and Information Science and American Studies from the University of South Florida. As an active member of the professional archives community since receiving the Certified Archivist designation in 2005, Tamara has served as president of the Society of American Archivists, president of the Academy of Certified Archivists, and the president of the Society of Florida Archivists. Tamara is the Society of Florida Archivists 2012 Award of Excellence recipient and the USF School of Information's 2021 Jean Key Gates Distinguished Alumni Award recipient and the Academy of Certified Archivists 2023 Distinguished Service Award recipient. I will now turn the presentation over to you, Tamara.
Thank you, Dr. Sheriff, and good evening, everyone. As Dr. Sheriff said, my name is Tamara Taylor, and I am a 2002 graduate of USF's Library and Information Science Master's Program. The past nearly 25 years of my professional career have been met with much change and many challenges, but none nearly as pressing as the changes and challenges we see before us in real time as things around us shift, adjust, and make space for the unexpected. The reality is that everything around us is always unexpected. I did not expect to be at USF almost 30 years after I began, and I most certainly didn't expect to be giving the annual Alice G. Smith Lecture. Both are happy surprises, and I am grateful for the honor and privilege. When I was asked to give tonight's lecture, Dr. Sheriff informed me there had not been an archives-based lecture since Bernadette Storks in 1996. I had the pleasure of knowing Bernadette through former USF Libraries Dean Derry Perez during our shared time in service to the Florida Library Association. I later had an opportunity to work directly with Bernadette on FLA's Archives Committee. I am humbled to be one of the first archives practitioners since Bernadette to give the annual Alice G. Smith Lecture. To keep things fairly simple, I have approached this lecture in much the same way that I approached my library school career. I waited until the last minute to prepare my remarks. Like all students, I had plenty of time to prepare, but like most students, other things have taken precedence and led to a level of procrastination that rendered me presentationless until a few short days ago. Because of that, I decided to break my remarks into the following segments: a little about myself, a bit more about what you can expect, and a lot about archives. So let's get started. My USF story begins as a 17-year-old freshman studying pre-med biology and chemistry with a plan to become a psychiatrist. 4 degrees later, 2 undergraduate degrees and 2 graduate degrees, and none of them in medicine, I am in academic library land as the USF Library's Director of Special Collections. Special Collections is a library within a library, a microcosm of materials that serve to bolster the parent organization's collections, services, programs, research interests, and areas of expertise. Archives and other rare primary source materials expand upon the library's offerings, allowing users further opportunities for exploration and interpretation. The USF Library's Tampa Special Collections celebrated its 60th anniversary in 2022. What began as a minimally staffed area with a select few collections of archives and books has grown to a multiple unit department of 13 employees, over 500 archival collections, roughly 105,000 books, and more than 100,000 digital objects. We specialize in traditional areas such as Florida Studies and University Archives, and innovate with AI and GIS technologies. Last year, we welcomed the USF Herbarium into special collections, bringing new projects, collaborations, and opportunities to our department. The Herbarium also added 300,000 plant specimens to our collections. Special collections also includes the Nelson Poynter Memorial Library's Special Collections and University Archives at USF St. Petersburg, which boasts a wealth of materials and artifacts documenting our neighboring city and branch campus. Both locations advance the use of special collections resources in instruction and research, encouraging exploration of and engagement with primary source materials for intentional and casual use. I started in special collections as a visiting librarian in the Dr. Henrietta M. Smith residency program. It was never intended to be a permanent position. The 2-year program was designed to engage participants in academic librarianship at the USF Tampa Library. Residents were assigned to departments or areas in the Tampa Library and paired with a mentor to help guide them through the newness of professional librarianship in a university setting. My mentor was Carol Ann Borkert, now Senior Associate Dean of the USF Libraries, and also my current supervisor. In short, we've come full circle in just about 20 years' time. Since starting as resident in the reference department and eventually landing as Director of Special Collections, my USF Libraries career hasn't always followed a linear path. I left reference in 2004 and went back again in 2017. I left Special Collections in 2010 and went back again in 2018. At various points in between, I cataloged or conducted library instruction sessions or served as a liaison to a random selection of degree programs or worked at the Mental Health Institute Research Library. But after the spring of 2003, I always did archives, even if it was vicariously through someone else's work. So when I say I love archives, I mean it. I feel it with every ounce of my being. And when I say I love archivists, I mean it even more. Words cannot express the joy I feel for people in the archives field. The funny thing is that I can't really tell you why I love archives and archivists. I just do. If I think about it long enough, I believe it has a lot to do with my introduction to the field. In the Tampa Library Special Collections, there wasn't gatekeeping or siloing of information, just an opportunity to explore, engage, and learn from experienced individuals who were invested in the final product of a well-organized collection. During and immediately after library school, I fell backwards into a field that outstretched its arms in supportive ways. This was important because, unlike many librarians, I never had dreams of working in a library. I didn't even have plans. The professional encouragement I experienced multiplied in special collections and eventually the greater archives community. It was in this open learning environment, under an apprenticeship with departmental archivist Gail Penner, that I learned how to properly arrange and describe archival materials. I also learned Gail's true thoughts on the whole matter of archives and libraries. What good is knowledge if it isn't shared? Gail's question reflected many of the thought processes then permeating the archives field. It became my own mantra and the way I began approaching my archives practice. What good is knowledge if it's not shared? Or in my life's work, what good is the archive if it isn't experienced? This, sharing, is a common refrain in the archives field. We hear and preach about it in terms of reading room and online access, or borrowing materials through interlibrary loan or for classroom use. In fact, while we often think of sharing as an action that begins with the archive, it actually begins before. Contributors don't just donate their collections and materials to an archival repository, they share their lives. They share themselves in whole or in part, thereby contributing to the greater story of who we are as a people and a society. Perhaps that is at the core of why I love archives and archivists. It's the recursive experience of bringing people and paper together to tell the story of our shared lives, no matter how different the actual experience is. The archives field, however, is on the offensive, or at the very least, the prevailing sentiment among cultural heritage workers is that recent events affecting the archives community threaten the preservation of our history and identity. This is where I state that I am not an activist or an ideologue. Um, just lost where I was. I was so concerned about making that statement, but I'm not. I'm not an activist or an ideologue, and that this is not a lecture on the politicization of archives. As someone who reads the news and who suggests you do too, it is not my intention to present such strong positionality on the topic of archives that my discourse sways you in any particular direction. I aim to encourage your creative and critical approaches to thinking about what the archive is or is not, and what it potentially can be in the future. Thus, this is not a recitation of politics, but of principles of ideas that stem from the archive itself. As such, opinions I espouse, or ones you supposedly hear, stated or otherwise, are mine alone, and may not be the opinions of any body, academic or otherwise, that I am presumed to represent. So now that that's out of the way, let's start. Tonight's lecture is entitled When the Archive is Not Enough. This title came to me while I brooded over ways to present what could be construed as a politically charged lecture. Make no mistake, this lecture is not political, but archives are. If archives weren't political, there wouldn't be any question about their role in memory, place, or community making. When Dr. Sheriff invited me to be tonight's lecturer, I wasn't overly concerned about the intersection of archives and politics, but things have changed since then. In just under 3 months, the archives profession is without a head archivist, and the museum and library sector is without the IMLS. It's not just the archives that have become vulnerable, but the cultural heritage sector as a whole. However, regardless of what my recent position as the Society of American Archivists president might suggest, I do not feel I have the credentials to speak at length on such topics. I may read the news, but it's not always the news you might expect. And I may stay abreast of my field, but there are some changes you can't keep up with. For example, for those who may not already know, I chose to resign from my presidential post as SAA president and insulate myself from the politics-driven chaos by focusing my attention and care on those in my immediate circle. Serving as head of a national organization takes you away from the responsibilities that put you there in the first place. Oftentimes, you end up choosing between what become divergent areas of responsibility. It was imperative that I chose my work at the USF libraries. My decision came just a few short weeks after Dr. Colleen Shogan was fired from her position as Archivist of the United States. Dr. Shogan was the 11th Archivist of the United States, and her dismissal was unprecedented, as every AOTIS before her, there had been 10 formally since 1934, retired from the position at an average of 5.25 years. Dr. Shogan served 2 years as AOTIS. Her term ended with just as much controversy in the archives community as it began. Because she wasn't a trained archivist, some professionals suggested she shouldn't be the archivist. Although I understand the sentiment, that seems rather elitist. There are many professionals in a range of sectors who aren't trained, yet they engage in labor and do work every day. That doesn't make it right or wrong, it just makes it what it is. In my opinion, Dr. Shogun demonstrated a facility for drawing attention to historic documents and making them tangible through social media, blog posts, and columns for organizations external to the National Archives and Records Administration. She challenged the public's perception of works like the Declaration of Independence as a dusty old document and brought sanctity, reverence, and excitement back to seeing our nation's foundational records. Dr. Shogun's firing had nothing and everything to do with me vacating my Society of American Archivists post. In sum, it behooved me and my profession to allow others an opportunity to more directly confront issues as they arose. That was a privilege I could not accept. In the weeks since and before, I have thought a lot about the privilege of working with archives. More so, I have been thinking about the privilege of working with archives in the modern era. This lecture is a reimagining of what the archive is and how that speaks to our current needs as a society. It is a call out for engaging in the work of archives and archivists, including the work of citizen archivists outside of archival repositories. This lecture presents a perfect world scenario in which the archive as place remains sufficient even when the archive is not enough. So much of history is fleeting. We lose bits of it here and there whenever someone dies, when man-made and natural disasters strike, and when documentation and preservation fail. We also lose history when we don't talk or read about it, when conversations are left unsaid and books are left on shelves to collect dust. Archives, the noun, can fill these blank spaces. They can provide the means for piecing together information that may not be readily available via other sources. Archiving, the verb, is the agency and responsibility to archive. It is the method by which we as humans collect and curate the world around us, selectively retaining data to capture a particular feeling or specific moment in time. Most of the archivists I know approach their work with the utmost care. They meticulously collect and arrange and describe and make available for use records that either tell a story on their own or contribute to a bigger, better, and more well-rounded story as a whole. They strive to preserve documents of historical importance and popular interest, teetering the line between materials with inherent research value and showpieces that will draw people into their collections. Every archive has a "what is that" in the collection, and every archivist has a story behind that item. Our skill is not just in preserving it, but in presenting it, in making that item the kind of thing you want to appreciate and revere. But the archivists I know aren't just thinking about the records. They're also thinking about the people who create and use records. They're thinking about how researchers access materials and information and the best ways to provide those opportunities. They're thinking about the type of information researchers need and the best ways to get it to them. They're also thinking about why that information may be needed and determining ways to procure, promote, and support access. Archivists do more than collect and organize documents and digital files. They creatively and critically approach information with an eye toward the network of people connected by it. They are the ultimate intermediaries, bridging the gap between record creators and record users, filling the blank spaces where data could have been lost, forgotten, or otherwise abandoned. But they can't do that work alone. In the rapidly changing environment that is the world around us, acknowledging the work of archivists and the role of archives means acknowledging that the archive is not enough. The archives are not enough. The archives as place is not faultless, and the archives as tangible history are not faultless either. In our practice, both current and previous methods of documentation including the systems we use to record and provide access to materials, are rife with failed attempts at neutrality. It is only in recent years that archivists have come to accept and address the inherent biases we bring to our work and that filter down from the repositories we work in. This, like the question of trained versus untrained archives workers, is neither right nor wrong. It just is. So, what do we do about it? How do we fix a problem that most people don't know we have? We start by acknowledging that most people is in and of itself preferential. There are huge swaths of people, whole networks, that would say archives have a problem, a massive problem of not capturing their memories or making their records available to the public. Those problems then extend into the larger issues of what is being preserved and who is able to access it. Thus, the perception of the archives having a problem becomes the assumed reality that the archive is the problem. I cannot argue for or against this. I can only conduct and foster work that aims to shift this perception through effective outreach, stewardship, and related opportunities that draw people into the archive. In my opinion, it helps to mitigate the archival institution's perceived power and aims to afford communities the sense of agency they need to work both with and within the archive. This is imperative for expanding both our reach and our collections and the community's trust in our work. Working with communities to document and interpret their own history is powerful. When I reimagine the archive, I imagine environments that are inherently more reciprocal, environments in which collaboration means considering the ways archivists can contribute to, and not just do the work of, the archive. Contributions, as I suggested earlier, are a means of sharing. And when archivists share in the work of documenting history, a richer record of our experiences as a society can be preserved and made available. Communities that engage the archive in their record-keeping practices break open brick and mortar walls and expand the archive into the world beyond. This type of work is not new, but it is not often included among typical archival practices when the day-to-day activities of archives workers are considered. We have to relinquish the staid mindset of archivists as arrangers and processors and accept that archivists can be active participants in helping communities create their own records. Creating records with a community removes the archivist's abstraction, meaning the archivist is no longer telling a collection story through his or her own subjective lens, but is facilitating access to another story using their own words. It is important that archives creators, in this example, the communities external to the archival repositories, be encouraged to tell their own stories, not just through the records they create, but in the words they use to describe their records. I, along with others in my department, am currently engaged in work that aims to increase local documentation by collaborating on the targeted memory-making efforts of neighborhood residents themselves. Concentric Circles, Collaborative Community Archiving, is a Mellon Foundation subaward through the University of California, Irvine. UCI received an $800,000 multi-year grant to transform education, archives, and community history by engaging academic libraries in training, pedagogy, and partnerships in their communities. My project aims to increase documentation of the Tampa Heights and Sulphur Springs neighborhoods in Tampa, Florida through community archiving. Tampa Heights and Sulphur Springs are historically underdocumented communities that are either experiencing or at imminent risk of experiencing demographic changes due to social and economic shifts in Tampa's urban center. These changes strongly indicate the need for enhancing memory-keeping practices among current and former residents, and for collecting stories and memories that chronicle the changing landscape of these historic neighborhoods. My partners are Fatima Elcott and Naya Young of Conscious Community Connectors, a consulting firm that works with the Tampa Heights Junior Civic Association, and Kelly Curtis, director of the Sulphur Springs Museum. Together, we will engage the Sulphur Springs and Tampa Heights neighborhoods in prioritizing the collection of oral histories from current and former residents, documenting the Tampa Heights and Sulphur Springs neighborhoods through still photography, working with local residents to conduct personal and family archiving projects, and encouraging digitization of historic and contemporary documents and photographs during community-centered events and workshops. In summary, we will guide and support these neighborhoods through creating their own records in their own words. There are at least 6 additional CCAP Teach projects across the U.S., led by archives practitioners, and each project actively engages local communities in documenting their own histories as they want them to be told. There are also countless citizen archivists, some who are affiliated with repositories and some who are not, who tirelessly conduct or coordinate record keeping within their local communities. It doesn't have to be challenging. Grab a camera and take photographs of your neighborhood. Grab a friend and record pictures of them standing in front of their house talking about their experiences growing up. Keep a diary or journal of what you see and know. These are the archives of our lives as a human population and society. So when I reimagine the archive, I imagine citizen archivists intentionally keeping records of their lives, their surroundings, and the world as they see it and want it to be remembered. And I imagine archivists helping those records take shape through participatory and supportive actions that empower networks of individuals in their own records creation. The challenge lies in keeping these communities in conversation and ensuring those conversations always center the records. The archive is not enough. The archives are not enough. We must share in the creation of records that effectively document our own memories and lived experiences. We must aim at times to be our own archivists and to create our own communities of archives that cut across training, perceptions, and repositories. The archive needs citizen archivists to foster the culture and kinship of archiving, because the archive will never be enough without the direct involvement of the people it purports to serve. In closing, I thank the USF School of Information for giving me the opportunity to learn and grow from my experience in the master's program. I am honored to be tonight's lecturer and humbled that you chose to spend your time with me this evening. Thank you.
Tomorrow for such a moving presentation. Tomorrow we'll be receiving a plaque of recognition and our gratitude for serving as the 36th Alice G. Smith Lecturer. I'll now turn off the recording, and if we have any questions, we can